There's a sound a ship's deck makes right before it fails. A sickening, high-pitched fracture that vibrates straight up your spine. The galaxy thought humans were fragile. They thought our home world was a featherweight joke. They were laughing, right up until Cole's boot met their flagship's floor. The diplomatic shuttle Omaha smelled like burned dust and stale coffee. It was a utilitarian smell, baked into the bulkheads after 3 years of deep space deployment. Romano Cole sat in the cramped passenger compartment, staring at the scarred metal deck between his boots. He rubbed a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble along his jawline. He was 42 years old, 20 of which had been spent in the Terran diplomatic corps, dragging humanity's messy, loud and inconvenient reality onto the pristine stage of galactic politics. He was tired. The kind of tired that sleep didn't fix anymore. "Approaching the rendezvous coordinates, boss," Miller called from the cockpit. The pilot's voice crackled over the internal comms, dry and completely devoid of the awe they were supposed to be feeling. "Visual on the Zathi dreadnought. It's big." Cole unbuckled his crash webbing and stood up in the confined space. He took 2 steps to the cockpit doorway and looked over Miller's shoulder. Hanging in the blackness of space against the backdrop of a blue-white nebula was the gilded Talon. It didn't look like a warship. It looked like a floating cathedral of spun glass and silver wire. Vast, sweeping arches connected enormous cylindrical habitats. The hull was slightly translucent, glowing from within with a soft, bioluminescent purple light. It was elegant. It was beautiful. It was also completely structurally unsound by Earth standards. But that wasn't a conversation Cole felt like having today. "They're broadcasting on an open channel," Miller said, his fingers dancing across the console. "Audio and visual. High def. They want the whole sector to watch us crawl on our bellies." "Let them broadcast," Cole said, turning back to the gear locker. "Saves me the trouble of drafting a summary report." The core of the problem, as it so often was in galactic politics, came down to a clerical error. When humanity first made contact with the galactic Concord 5 years ago, Earth had submitted its standard planetary telemetry: atmospheric composition, orbital mechanics, radiation levels, and gravitational constant. The Concord measured gravity in a unit called the Kel. 1 Kel translated roughly to 0.1 Earth Gs. The undisputed heavyweights of the Concord, the towering, chitin-armored Zathi, hailed from a world with a surface gravity of 4.2 keldros, roughly 0.4 Earth Gs. To the rest of the galaxy, the Zathi were monstrous bruisers who evolved in a crushing, punishing environment. They built their empire on the sheer intimidation of their biology. When Earth submitted a gravitational baseline of 10 Kel, the Concord's automated translation matrix spat it out. Biological life, according to galactic science, simply could not evolve past 5 Kel. The protein structures would collapse. Fluid dynamics in the circulatory system would fail. The matrix flagged the data as a catastrophic syntax error, and, assuming humanity had simply misplaced a decimal during unit conversion, autocorrected Earth's gravity to 1.0 Kelid, 1/10 of an Earth G. Overnight, humanity was officially classified as a Class 1 low-grav species. The Concord envisioned Earth as a fluffy, dandelion seed world, populated by gossamer-boned, fragile creatures who floated rather than walked. The humans had tried to correct the record, but Concord bureaucracy was a monolithic wall of red tape. After a year of being ignored, Earth's leadership simply gave up and focused on building out colony worlds. The Zathi, however, didn't ignore them. Believing humanity was weak, they had seized the Terran mining colony on Tartarus, demanding Earth formally surrender the sector. They invited the Terran envoy to their flagship to sign the treaty, intending to use their crushing 4.2 Kel artificial gravity to physically humiliate the human representative on live galactic feeds. Cole pulled his diplomatic jacket over his shoulders. It was a heavy wool blend, dark navy. Then he reached into the locker and pulled out his boots. They weren't standard footwear. They were Terran medical grav tethers. Long-haul spaceflight in low-gravity environments wreaked havoc on the human skeletal system. Without the constant downward pressure of Earth's brutal gravity, human bones dissolved into honeycomb. The boots were heavily weighted and lined with microgravimetric generators. They tied into a wearer's biometric sensors to actively pull the body downward, simulating exactly 9.8 meters per second squared of localized force. Cole strapped them on. They locked around his calves with a heavy, metallic clank. Instantly, he felt the familiar, comforting drag. The boots didn't just add weight, they enforced physics. "We have docking clearance," Miller announced, the shuttle shuddering as the docking clamps engaged. "Bay 4. Atmospheric seal confirmed. Pressure is a little low, but breathable. Gravity is—" Miller paused, looking at his readouts. He let out a short, cynical laugh. "Gravity in the hangar is reading at 0.422 Earth Gs. They cranked it up to their homeworld maximum." "Trying to make a point," Cole said flatly. "You want me to match our internal gravity to theirs so you can acclimatize?" "No," Cole said, checking the battery charge on his boots. A small green light blinked back at him. "Leave our internal grav at standard 1G. I don't need to acclimatize to a vacation." "Copy that. Airlock cycling in 10 seconds. Good luck out there, boss. Don't trip." "I never trip, Miller." Cole stood in front of the primary airlock. He rolled his shoulders, feeling the dense, coiled tension in his muscles. His skeleton, thick and heavily calcified from 42 years of resisting a planet trying to pull him into its core, felt perfectly aligned. The heavy steel door of the Omaha hissed, unsealed, and slid open. The hangar bay of the Gilded Talon was massive, resembling the vaulted interior of a grand opera house more than a military docking bay. The walls were constructed of a pearlescent, translucent material that seemed to catch and refract the ambient light. The floor, a vast, sweeping expanse of what looked like polished obsidian glass, was a high tensile silicate lattice. It was a marvel of engineering, incredibly strong under tension, designed to hold the weight of 50-ton shuttles, provided that weight was evenly distributed across broad, sprawling landing struts. Waiting at the bottom of the Omaha's short off-boarding ramp was Commander Val. The Zarthi commander was an imposing figure. He stood nearly 9 feet tall, his body a complex architecture of segmented, iridescent black armor plates. He stood on 4 wide, padded lower limbs, his weight spread over a massive surface area. 2 upper arms rested casually on his thorax. Behind him stood a dozen heavily armed honor guards, identical in their towering, sprawling stature. Floating in the air above them were several spherical camera drones, their red lenses fixed on the shuttle door. The broadcast was live. The entire sector was watching, waiting to see the frail, glass-boned human crawl out of the ship, crushed beneath the oppressive, terrifying might of Zarthi gravity. Cole stepped into the threshold of the airlock. He didn't look like a frail, glass-boned creature. He looked like a cinder block poured into a navy suit. He was broad-shouldered, compact, and completely still. Val's mandibles clicked, the translation collar around his thick neck, projecting his voice in heavily accented English. "Envoy Cole, you are late. Step down from your vessel and present your world's capitulation." Val's tone was dripping with smug superiority. He was waiting for the human to take that first step into the 0.42G field, expecting Cole to buckle, to gasp for air, to collapse under the sheer, unforgiving weight of the Zathi environment. Cole didn't say a word. He just looked at the polished silicate floor, then at Val. He sighed, the sound escaping as a short, exhausted breath. He took a step forward. The mechanics of the human gait are unique in the galaxy. For most low-gravity species, walking is a gliding shuffle, a process of gently pushing off and floating to the next point of contact. But human walking is entirely different. It is, from a biomechanical standpoint, a series of controlled falls. A human throws their dense center of mass forward, letting gravity yank them down, and then violently arrests that fall by slamming a heavily muscled, bone-dense appendage into the earth. In a 1G environment, it is a hammer blow. Cole's foot left the steel ramp of his shuttle. As it entered the ambient environment of the hangar, the microgenerators in his boots instantly detected the drop in gravity. They whined almost imperceptibly, spinning up to enforce Earth normal. Cole brought his foot down. His heel struck the pearlescent silicate deck. A 3-inch point of contact, carrying 220 pounds of dense human mass, driven downward by the explosive kinetic force of 1G calibrated leg muscles and artificially accelerated by the gravity tethers. Crack. The sound was like a gunshot in a cathedral. It didn't echo. It snapped. Sharp, violent, and deafening. Val flinched, his upper arms jerking toward his weapons belt. The honor guard took a collective, staggering step backward. The camera drones buzzed, their lenses instantly zooming in on the source of the noise. Beneath Cole's right boot, a spiderweb of jagged white fractures radiated outward through the pristine, polished deck. The high-tensile silicate lattice, designed to hold distributed weight, had completely failed under the brutal, concentrated point pressure of a human footfall. Cole didn't pause. He shifted his weight, throwing his mass forward, and brought his left boot down. Crunch! The deck shattered further, shards of pearlescent material splintering upward, raining down like broken ice. The structural integrity field of the floor whined in protest, a high-pitched electronic scream as it desperately tried to reinforce the localized area. It wasn't enough. Cole kept walking. Crack, crunch, snap. With every step, the human was quite literally breaking their flagship. He wasn't marching. He wasn't stomping. He was just walking with the weary, heavy gait of a man who wanted a cup of coffee and a flight home. But the deck was giving way beneath him, groaning and fracturing as if subjected to concentrated artillery fire. The Zathi guards raised their plasma rifles, their compound eyes wide with a very new, very alien emotion. Fear. The creature walking toward them wasn't dying under their gravity. It was too dense, too heavy. It was a localized anomaly of kinetic destruction. "Hold your fire!" Val bellowed, though his voice wavered. The translation collar struggled to capture the sheer panic in his mandibles. Cole reached the bottom of the ramp. He stood in a small crater of shattered glass and ruined technology. The deck beneath him had sunk 2 inches, the structural framing groaning under his localized mass. He stopped a few feet from Val, the towering Zathi commander, who had planned to look down upon a crawling, gasping weakling, found himself staring down at a terrifyingly solid block of a man standing amidst the ruins of his floor. Cole slowly looked around the hangar, noting the raised rifles and the horrified expressions of the honor guard. Then he looked up at Val. He didn't yell. He didn't posture. He just reached into his jacket, pulled out the digital datapad containing the treaty, and held it out. "You demanded I come down here," Cole said, his voice flat, cutting through the terrified silence of the hangar. "So here I am. But if we're going to talk about Tartarus, you're going to have to pay for the floor." The silence in the hangar stretched, thick and suffocating, broken only by the frantic, mechanical buzzing of the camera drones. Their lenses darted between Cole's impassive face and the shattered crater of pearlescent silicate beneath his boots. Half a galaxy away, trillions of beings watching the live feed were suddenly forced to reconsider their understanding of basic biology. Commander Varl's mandibles twitched in rapid, agitated successions. His 4 lower limbs shifted, distributing his weight nervously across the deck. He pointed a trembling, segmented digit at Cole's feet. "Trickery," Varl hissed. The translation collar rendered his voice with a synthetic, defensive edge. "You employ illicit gravimetric augments. You seek to simulate mass to compensate for your species' physiological inferiority." Cole sighed. He reached up and pinched the bridge of his nose, squeezing his eyes shut for a brief second. He didn't have the patience for this. The headache that had been threatening him since he left Earth orbit was finally settling in behind his eyes. "Varl," Cole said, his voice exhausted. He dropped his hand and looked directly into the Zathi's compound eyes. "These are medical tethers. They don't simulate mass. They simulate gravity. Without them, my bones would leach calcium and my muscles would atrophy in this featherweight environment you call a flagship." He tapped his thigh. "My mass is constant. 220 pounds of bone, water, and dense muscle tissue. Your deck isn't breaking because I'm using a trick. Your deck is breaking because your engineers designed it to support beings who evolved on a sponge. Now where is the negotiation table? I have a shuttle to catch." Varl stared at him, the bravado completely drained from his towering frame. He looked at his honor guard. They had lowered their rifles. There was no protocol in the Zathi military manual for engaging an enemy who destroyed fortified infrastructure simply by walking on it. "Follow," Varl managed to say, turning on his heel. He didn't wait to see if Cole obeyed. He just wanted to get the human out of the hangar bay before the structural integrity field overloaded and vented them all into the vacuum of space. Cole walked. It was a slow, agonizing procession. The Gilded Talon was a masterpiece of Zathi architecture, a ship built for gliding grace and broad, sweeping movements. It was not built for the kinetic violence of a human stride. Crack, crunch. Every step Cole took sent a fresh web of fractures shooting across the polished decks of the primary concourse. The sound echoed down the vast, translucent corridors, a rhythmic, terrifying drumbeat. Snap, crunch. Maintenance bulkheads hissed open as frantic Zathi technicians scurried out, armed with resin welders and structural foaming agents. They scrambled behind Cole like street sweepers behind a parade, desperately patching the pulverized deck plates the moment his boot lifted from them. Alarm klaxons began to wail in the distance, soft, musical chimes that indicated localized hull stress. They reached a set of grand, sweeping doors leading to the diplomatic wing. The doors were made of a shimmering, semi-liquid alloy that parted like a curtain when Varl approached. Beyond them was the conference room. It was a stunning space, suspended within one of the ship's massive glass arches, offering a panoramic view of the blue-white nebula outside. The center of the room was dominated by a large, oval table constructed of the same fragile-looking silicate lattice as the hangar floor. "Be seated," Varl said, gesturing to a chair that looked like it was woven from spun sugar and silver wire. Cole stopped at the edge of the table. He looked at the chair. He looked at Varl. "If I sit in that," Cole said dryly, "I'm going to end up on the floor, and your chair is going to end up in pieces. I'll stand." Varl moved to the opposite side of the table, his forelegs folding beneath him as he settled onto a reinforced dais. He tried to project authority, puffing out his thorax and leaning forward. "The Concord record states your world possesses a gravitational constant of 1.0 km, a Class 1 environment. You are attempting a deception that violates intergalactic diplomatic law." Cole didn't answer immediately. He reached into his jacket pocket. The movement was casual, but the Zathi guards flanking the room instinctively tensed. Cole pulled out a standard Terran stylus. It was a heavy, industrial thing, machined from solid tungsten. The only material humanity had found that could consistently survive the rigors of heavy G-drops and explosive depressurization. Cole tossed it across the table. The stylus flew in a low, flat arc. It hit the surface of the silicate table with a sharp, heavy clack, sliding until it stopped right in front of Val. "Pick it up," Cole said. Val frowned, his mandibles clicking in confusion. He reached out with one of his upper manipulators and grasped the small metal cylinder. He pulled. The stylus didn't move. Val's compound eyes narrowed. He gripped it tighter, engaging the hydraulic musculature in his arm, and pulled harder. The stylus lifted an inch off the table, trembling violently in his grasp. The Zathi commander was straining, his segmented arm shaking under the sheer, unexpected density of the small object. He let it drop. It hit the table with another heavy thud, leaving a tiny spiderweb scratch on the pristine surface. "What is this?" Val breathed. "That is tungsten," Cole said. "It's what we use to write down our grocery lists. We build our ships out of titanium, carbon steel, and depleted uranium. Because where we come from, if you build something out of glass and wire, the planet crushes it into dust." Cole placed both of his hands flat on the table and leaned his weight forward. The silicate lattice shrieked. A massive, jagged fissure shot down the center of the table, splitting the polished surface right between Cole and Val. "Earth's gravity isn't 1.0 Kel," Cole said, his voice dropping to a low, quiet register that carried effortlessly over the groaning of the dying table. The Concorde's translation matrix couldn't comprehend our telemetry, so it auto-corrected. "Earth is 10 Kel 10. Val recoiled, his lower limbs scrambling backward on the dais. The translation collar struggled to process the gasp that tore from his spiracles. 10? That is, biological impossibility, the atmospheric pressure, the sheer kinetic friction. "Is a Tuesday for us," Cole interrupted. "We spent the last year trying to file the paperwork to fix your clerical error. You ignored us. That was fine. We don't care much for Concorde politics anyway. We like to be left alone." Cole stood up straight, pulling his datapad from his jacket. "But then," Cole continued, his eyes hardening, "you mistook our silence for weakness. You looked at a typo on a spreadsheet and decided to invade the Tartarus mining colony. You put plasma burns on Terran infrastructure. You threatened our people." Cole tossed the datapad onto the fractured table. It skidded to a halt beside the heavy tungsten stylus. The screen glowed, displaying a single, simple document. A total cessation of hostilities and a complete withdrawal of Zathi forces from the Tartarus sector. "Sign it," Cole said. Val stared at the datapad. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile the data his eyes were providing with the fundamental laws of physics he had been taught his entire life. 10 Kel. It meant the creature standing across from him was quite literally a walking kinetic weapon. It meant their bones were dense as stone, their muscles coiled like industrial steel cables. "We have an armada holding orbit over Tartarus," Val said, though it sounded more like a desperate plea than a threat. 200 warships. You possess rudimentary projectile ballistics and localized chemical combustion drives. You cannot fight a war against the Zathi. Cole let out a short, cynical laugh. It was a cold sound. "Val, look around you," Cole said, gesturing to the cracks radiating from his boots, the split table, the terrified guards. "Your flagship is tearing itself apart, just trying to support my resting body weight. What do you think happens when a Terran dreadnought, armored in 3 meters of high-density kinetic plating, decides to ram one of your spun-glass cruisers at a fraction of light speed. Varl's mandibles clicked uselessly. He had no answer. Your plasma weapons are designed to melt light alloys and pierce unarmored hulls, Cole continued, leaning in again. We tested captured Zarthi plasma rifles on standard Terran infantry armor. It warmed it up by about 4 degrees. In return, we don't shoot energy. We shoot solid slugs of metal propelled by magnetic rails. Your shields are calibrated to disperse thermal blooms. They won't even register a 3-ton block of depleted uranium moving at Mach 20 until it has caved in your bridge. Cole tapped the datapad with a heavy, blunt finger. We didn't surrender Tartarus because we were weak, Varl. We didn't fight back because the colonial governor was waiting on authorization from Earth to open fire. I am here to tell you that if you do not sign this treaty right now, that authorization goes through, and the Terran Navy is going to come here and find out exactly how fragile you really are. The conference room was dead silent. The live broadcast feed in the corner of the room showed the viewer count skyrocketing. The entire Concord was watching the unassailable, terrifying Zarthi Empire being bullied in their own flagship by a tired man in a wool suit. Varl looked at his honor guard. They were statues, absolutely paralyzed by the physical reality of the human standing before them. The Zarthi built their empire on intimidation, on being the biggest, heaviest things in the room. Romano Cole was half their height, and he had eclipsed them entirely. With a trembling manipulator, Varl reached out and tapped his biometric signature onto the datapad screen. The document flashed green. The treaty was signed. Tartarus was returned. Cole didn't smile. He didn't gloat. He simply reached across the shattered table, picked up his datapad, and slid it back into his jacket pocket. Then he picked up the tungsten stylus. Good, Cole said. Your forces have 24 standard hours to vacate the sector. Leave the mining equipment. Consider it a down payment on the damages to our colony. He turned his back on the Zarthi commander. He didn't look at the armed guards. He knew with absolute certainty that not a single one of them would dare pull a trigger. Cole began the long walk back to the hangar bay. Crack, crunch, snap. The sound resumed, a heavy, devastating rhythm echoing through the gilded talon. Varl remained on his dais, watching the human walk away, leaving a permanent trail of pulverized architecture in his wake. The automated maintenance crews were already scrambling behind him, their sirens a pathetic wail against the sheer, inevitable destruction of a human, simply putting one foot in front of the other. 10 minutes later, the airlock of the Omaha sealed shut with a heavy, satisfying metallic clank. Cole stood in the small passenger compartment. He reached down, unlatched the heavy metal buckles of his grav tethers, and kicked the boots off. They hit the deck plate with a dull thud. He let out a long, shuddering breath, rolling his shoulders as the tension finally began to leave his heavily calcified bones. "Welcome back, boss." Miller's voice crackled over the intercom. The pilot sounded wildly amused. "I was watching the feed. You broke their table." "I broke their floor, too," Cole muttered, walking over to the small kitchenette and pouring himself a cup of stale, lukewarm coffee. He took a sip and winced. "Telemetry shows the Zarthi fleet over Tartarus is already breaking orbit," Miller reported, the engines of the Omaha whining as they decoupled from the dreadnought. "They are burning hard for the jump point. Looks like they're in a hurry." "They are," Cole said, dropping into his crash seat and strapping in. He looked out the small viewport, watching the beautiful, fragile glass architecture of the gilded talon drift away. "Take us home, Miller." "Aye, boss." Setting course for Earth. The shuttle banked, the inertial dampeners pushing Cole firmly back into his seat. It felt like a gentle hug compared to the crushing reality of his homeworld. Hey, Cole? Yeah, next time they invite us to a diplomatic summit, you think we should send the Marines? Cole took another sip of his terrible coffee, staring out at the vast, dark expanse of the galaxy. A galaxy that had just learned exactly how heavy humanity could be. No, Cole said quietly. I think they've seen enough of us for one lifetime. If you enjoyed this deep dive into humanity's heavy-hitting entrance onto the galactic stage, smash that like button harder than Cole shattered the Gilded Talon's deck. Subscribe for more grounded, hard-hitting sci-fi stories where Earth doesn't just bend the rules, we break them entirely. Share this video with a friend to spread the HFY love, and drop a comment below letting us know what alien tech humanity should accidentally destroy next. See you in the next one.